Hello, and welcome to Fierce Conversations with Toby, the show where we talk about the hard things. I'm Toby Dorr. In today's episode, we will find the beauty in grief. Our guest today is Wendy Elle, who can be found in the frozen woods of Canada or chilling at her second home, the Fish Shack on Stony Island in Newfoundland, where she shares early morning beach walks with Ralph, the most famous dog in Canada. Grounded in her faith and driven by a passion for design and writing, Wendy has been honing her creative craft since childhood in diverse ways. Her creative practices have blossomed into a lifelong dream of being an author, telling her own stories and the stories of others. After significant deaths in the family, including her precious 5-year-old son, Wendy is writing her first book, her life story of beautiful flaws and perfect mistakes, to share a million how-tos on surviving anything well. Hi, Wendy. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
I'm so delighted to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. This is, it's going to be a fun chat.
I think so. And it's something that people don't usually talk about. And it's an important part of our lives because you can't avoid grief. It's part of who we all are. And to try to sweep it under the rug and pretend it isn't there just doesn't benefit anyone. I like to ask all my guests a question that gives us a peek into who you are. I think I already know the answer to this one, but my listeners don't. What's your favorite color? And what does color say about you?
Oh, goodness. Well, with a design background for the last 30 years, you hit me on a really soft spot there, because my favorite color is any shade of white.
And there's millions of shades of white, aren't there? Yeah.
You can tell from my background. Yeah. Uh-huh. So I'm kind of a neutral girl. I do love color, but if I have to pick a favorite, it's any shade on the white spectrum.
And what do you think white says, the color white? What does it communicate?
I think for me, white is a clean palette. It allows me complete freedom. There's no borders, even in the peripheral vision. There's no distractions. And I think for the way that I want to live my life and that I am developing as I get older, a clean slate, a clean palette, a clean canvas allows me to pull in and gather all of the things that I do on purpose. Whereas when I find a life that it's messy with color, I feel a bit claustrophobic.
I see. That would probably be my life, messy with color.
Well, and that's why opposites attract, Toby.
Yes, that's true. And, I don't think I'll ever look at white in the same way again. It's just a nothing color. There is a lot of warmth to it. There's a lot of whites behind you, and they just have different feelings. So I'm going to have to reconsider, perhaps.
When you actually really look at, when you actually really look at white, they have all the color of the rainbow within the white. And that's the really interesting thing.
Yes, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about a crossroads in your life that pushed you in a different direction?
There are many. So it's a really difficult question to answer, but I'm going to answer the most significant one, obviously within the subject of what we're speaking about. The most significant crossword was the death of my 5-year-old son, because it was an accident. It was unexpected. It wasn't a sickness or an illness where we had the time to process. It was 1 minute he was here and the next he was gone. And I would say of all the crossroads that we intersect in our life, that is pretty major for me.
That is a major one. I can relate. I've lost 2 kids myself, but you can't, it isn't the same. Everybody's loss is different, and every loss feels differently. You can't compare them.
No, I think as I'm Um, right now, as I call it, I am actually in my season of grief, and I identify that time period quickly between DOB and DOD, which is
Mhm.
date of birth to date of death.
Mhm.
So I am in between Josh's birthday of February 5th and his death day, which is May 22nd.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that period of time in every single year is pretty significant for me, for our whole family. Um, and I know it's everyone identifies, like whether you've lost a mother, a father, a sibling, a best friend, a
Mhm.
marriage, a limb. Grief extends and blankets over all of those experiences. And I really have learned to listen when people are talking about their pain as it applies to grief. And the important thing for me is to not ever relate my story of losing a son to their story of losing a beloved parent or a mom. They are completely different and they all need to be really dialed in and paid attention to. And that's the beauty of our human experience is we get to share those stories.
I so agree with you. I lost 2 children, one as an infant and one as a young adult,
Uh-huh.
and you can't compare them. They're totally different experiences, and when you
Yeah.
try to compare them, you kinda take something away from those people you that have passed. So,
Uh-huh.
I do agree. I hate when people say, "I know how you feel." Like,
Uh-huh.
nobody can possibly know how anyone else feels. They might.
One, and I think when we make that statement, I know how you feel, we actually end the conversation.
Yes, yes, because it's not
Whereas,
very open.
yes. So I see that sentence, I know how you feel, as a bit of a hallmark statement. Meaning that it's not really a platitude or uh, something that we say to comfort someone.
Mhm.
But in order to really comfort someone, if we want to really pay attention, it would be tell me about your, and then fill in the blank.
Yes,
So
and let them have the stage. Mhm.
I would like to eradicate the sentence, I know how you feel from the planet.
Mhm.
Let's
Yes,
just do that.
I agree. I think it doesn't have a place. It just doesn't fit. So, can you tell us about Josh, about who he was, about what he brought to your life, and can you tell us about that day?
Yeah. I would love to. Before I do that, I want to premise two things. One is as we talk about how to deal with people who are grieving, I would much rather talk about Josh's life than his
Mhm.
death.
Mhm.
Um, because as you know, losing an infant, the memories stop on their day of death and no new memories are ever made. Yet when we're in groups of people with friends, with family, or whatever, it's okay to talk about your kids and their accomplishments and, the degrees that they're gathering or the sports that they're playing. And for a parent who's lost a child, they're out of that conversation.
And it
So to be,
hurts. It
Mhm,
kind of gets in there and kind of starts twisting things up because it reminds you of what you'll never know.
mhm. And I've had some people say, "Oh, I don't like to ask about Josh because I
Mhm.
don't want to make you sad." And I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm already sad about that. So when I get to
Yes.
talk about him,
Yes.
that makes
Mhm.
me happy. So thanks for
Yes.
asking that question.
Yes. You're welcome.
Um, so Josh died on May 22nd, which he had just turned 5 in February. He was an unusual little human being, and that is spoken from me as a parent, but also as a collective community. So we live in a small town, and Josh had the ability to touch many, many people. He saw people, and I'll give you a quick little example of that, so you can get to know him. we would have dates because I have 3 older daughters that were involved in everything you can imagine. And so him being the youngest, we had to fill time when they were playing piano lessons or skating or whatever. So we would have dates at our local restaurant. And he had one waitress that he just saw her. And one day he's standing up, peeking over the little divider that separated the booths. And he watched her. And he looked at me and he said, "Mom, she's beautiful." And it stopped me in my tracks because I looked and society would not identify her as being beautiful. Yet he was identifying her as beautiful. And
Because
he made her
Josh
feel
saw her and not
yes.
her features. He saw what was inside. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And
kids
so
have
that
that
was
beautiful ability to do that.
yeah. And that was his little superpower. And so he was able to make people feel very special, disarmed. And it was just like everywhere he went, he had open arms to love people, including us. I've
Yes.
never been loved so perfectly, but by Josh. So
Yes.
that's maybe a little bit about how he lived his life. He died on a very he was so excited. My husband's a commercial pilot. Um, we had an absence of an airplane for about 6 months while it was getting checked out by government regulations. And this was the first flight after it had all been cleared as safety and everything was fine. So it was a bit of a competition between all my 4 kids as to who got to have the first flight. And because we all adored him so much, and he was in the kitchen just jumping up and down. He had his little briefcase ready. He had his headphones ready. And so, of course, my older 3 daughters said, "Josh can go." And literally within 15 minutes, he died. So the
Yeah.
airplane took off at the airport. There was a blockage in the fuel line that starved the engine. My husband, the pilot, was not up high enough over the trees to recover the airplane, and the engine stalled and it headed to the earth. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I had never heard before that all of your daughters gave up a place on the plane to Josh. Did that trouble them afterwards? Did they feel
Um, there's it didn't really I think the whole experience was so shocking, traumatizing, and still has far-reaching fingers into our lives today.
yes,
But
of
there's one
course.
significant event that I was about 2 weeks later after the accident. I was lying in my bed. It was early in the morning. And one of my precious sweet girls came to my bedside and her little face was about level with the mattress where my head went. And she said, "Mom, I wish it would have been me because you
Oh.
still would have had a son and you have
Mhm.
2 other daughters." And
Mhm.
so that that even shows the depth of her heart as to what
Yes.
she was going through even at that time,
Mhm.
you know. I think I have kids with big hearts.
Yes, I think you
And
do too.
yeah.
I think you do
So
too.
yeah,
And
it didn't
so,
hurt all of them.
yeah. So, how do you even begin to move forward from an event that tragic and that sudden and that heartbreaking? What's the first step?
The first step for me was and that's very clear to me. I have a one of my best friends is a doctor. And she came to my door the next day with a bag full of medications and said, "Wendy, what do you need?" And I knew at that moment that I needed complete clarity as to
Mhm.
how to move forward.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really important thing to note that no emotion, no grief, no trauma can ever be delayed or ignored. And so my
That's
way
right.
moving forward would be to say, start dealing with it right away.
Mhm.
No delay.
Don't try
And
to cover it up. Don't try to medicate it. Don't try to pretend it's not there. Just face it head on.
Yeah, because when you wake up, when you stop medicating, guess what? You're brought right back to that very
Mhm,
second that you tried to make it go away.
mhm.
So I think my
That's
first step was to really pray. If you have a
mhm,
faith, to really pray and ask. I needed to know what to do. I needed
mhm.
clarity. I needed to know how to look after myself, how to look after my girls. My husband was he had been flown to a trauma hospital 3.5 hours away. I needed to know how to do that. I needed to know, how do I make the phone call to my mom,
Yeah.
who
Oh,
Josh,
Josh was the apple of her eye. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I needed clarity. I needed the words
Mhm,
on how to do that. So that would
mhm.
be my first thing, was to just, muster all your bravery, all your courage, all the experiences that you've ever had in your life to say, I can do this too. I can do the
Mhm,
hard things.
mhm.
And so it was just one step forward. And sometimes it was like the next breath. I can't
Yes.
breathe. Just have to
Mhm,
take the next breath. Or
mhm.
I need a shower. My plan for
Yeah.
the day is to have a shower, you
Mhm.
know? So yeah, those next steps. And I was really inspired by Elizabeth Elliot. If you look up the books that she's written, and her famous go-to line is just do the next thing.
I love that.
Yeah. And so I lived by that. Just do the next thing. And that might
I
be
think
comb your
that's
hair.
and that's something that you can grasp. If you set your goal too high, you can't do it, and then you feel like you failed. But if you just do the next thing, that's a little enough bite. You're right. It could just be taking a breath. It could be taking a shower. It could be going for a walk. So,
Yeah.
it moves you forward. It gives you something to focus on. And I
Yeah.
know you live in a small community where everyone knows everyone. And what was it like to go out in public for the first time when the whole town knows what you've experienced? What was that like?
So this was one thing that I was completely unprepared for. And I wish that I could have read it in a book. And that's why I'm writing a book, so that people, one thing that will be forever in our grief is the willingness to pave an easier road for those who come behind us.
Mhm. I
And
love that.
that is what inspires me to write, because the first time I ever went into the grocery store, I was actually having an okay day. And until I was in an aisle and I looked up and I saw two people who saw me, and they disappeared from the aisle. And I understood then that I created a discomfort for others just by my presence and just by my experience. And I compare it to, my pain was obviously so obvious. So it's like walking into a place with a broken leg. In a physical sense, everybody's going to ask you, what happened?
Yes.
But then you
Uh-huh.
walk into a public place and you have experienced the most monumental loss that you hopefully ever will have. People aren't comfortable to say what happened. First of all, you're in a public place, and everything is just, you're just wearing your pain, and
Yes.
you're alienated by it. You're alone. And
Mhm.
I was not expecting that.
And people don't know what to say, They they know you're hurting and they're afraid they're gonna say the wrong thing. So, what do you think might be a good thing that someone could kinda keep in the back of their mind if they ever encounter someone who's in tremendous grief? What do you think something they could say that would, open a door?
So the I think you're tossed at that time between, you need to be alone in your grief, because there's some of grief that's very private, and you also need to grieve publicly so that your friends can see that you're okay. And a lot of things that people said to me, yeah, it some things were really offensive. And I wasn't prepared for that either. But I think in in a generous way, grief also it requires us to be generous to those people who don't know what to say. Generosity covers the offense that happens when people say the wrong thing. So I probably was one of those people at a certain point who people suffered loss to say, "Oh, what can I do? Tell me what I can do." And in actuality, I don't know what you can do for me, but
And
what
that
I
kind of
love,
puts a burden on you, like now you're dealing with this. Now tell me what you want me to do. So you can't even think sometimes how to put one foot in front of the other, let alone try to tell somebody else what they can do.
right.
Yeah.
So I think words like "I'm here,"
Yes.
"I see you," "I'm here," and um, or "Can I come over sometime and will you?" "Can I give you the space just to talk about your son? Can
Yeah.
I come over and can I shed some tears with you?" And when you look back in history, um, not in North America, but in other countries, when you look back, grief was a community event. People gathered and cried and wailed. And to
That's
know
true.
that pain is shared. And so I think for somebody that you feel close to, engage in somehow sharing their pain because then the burden is not all theirs.
What about just walking up to them and giving them a hug?
Uh,
Would you have been
that
open to that?
in the grocery store, maybe not because I would have
Mhm.
completely fallen apart.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Sometimes when you're shown compassion,
Uh-huh.
you were okay, and then somebody shows you compassion, and then
Yes.
you're not okay.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So that's nice to say, "I'm here," or "Can I come over? Here's
Yes.
my number." Then you can do that in a private space.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I like that because, my inclination would be to walk up to somebody and give them a hug, but you're right. It kind of opens that emotional window for them, and they may not be comfortable with that in a public place. I like your suggestion. Can I come over and
Yeah.
just sit with you? I think that
Or
would be great.
when can I call you?
Yes.
Instead of
Yes.
call me if you need anything, turn the
Right.
question to when can I call you?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
in grief, I don't want to call people,
Right.
but if
And you don't wanna
somebody
have to remember it. You can't even remember to brush your teeth some days. How are you gonna remember that you need to call somebody because they ask you to? So, you
yeah,
can't really put any of the burden of the act on the person that's grieving. You have to turn it
right.
around so that you have the action to take.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I
So
think it's really something. Go ahead.
maybe the answer to all of those questions is whatever your default answer is or question, try to turn it around. And as
Yeah.
you said, turn it around to take the responsibility off of the grieving person. So call me anytime. Turn that into when can I call you?
Yes, I like that. I like that. Because really the worst thing you can do, I think, is to turn around and leave the aisle or walk past the person and act like you don't see them there.
Yeah.
Because I know I felt isolated, in my loss, and it was obvious to me that nobody knew how to deal with it, and I certainly didn't know how to deal with it. I mean, you don't expect to lose a baby before they ever come home from the hospital, and yet those people who were so uncomfortable and didn't know what to say made my grief even harder because I needed to talk about it and I didn't have anyone to talk about it with. So it
Yeah.
just kind of stays bottled in. It is a
Yeah.
difficult thing. It is a difficult thing to know how you can best serve someone who's grieving.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if we follow the rule, and I think it just came about in this conversation, if we
Mm-hmm.
follow the rule of flipping those sentences.
Yes.
So we make it, like, I call it a no hallmark zone.
Mm-hmm.
Like no cliches, no
Mm-hmm.
platitudes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, if we flip it around, maybe we need to reinvent those Hallmark cards.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And you said something to me the other day that I has really stuck in my mind. And that was, I didn't lose Josh. He's not lost. And people say, I'm sorry for your loss, or I'm sorry. When did you lose your son? And that really opened my eyes. So, how would you think is the kindest way for someone to express that without using the word loss?
I think it's okay for us. I mean, I'm a human that faces things head on. I want to use the language that is appropriate for the occasion. So when somebody gets married, I'm not going to say, "Oh, congratulations on the time that you walked down the aisle and said a vow." I'm going to say,
Right.
"Congratulations on your marriage."
Uh huh.
However, we can't say the word death and
People
died.
don't want to say it, do they?
No,
Yeah.
yet it's one of the most we are all going to die. And
Hmm.
so I am I am one to say my son died.
Yes.
I didn't lose him. And I know
Hmm.
that word used to bug me because as a 5-year-old, that's a thing. You go into the grocery store and they take off, or you're in the
And you
park
do
and
lose them. That's right. And
yeah,
but you can
you
find them and you can bring them back. Yeah.
yes, and that's right, Toby. Loss signifies finding. When
Hmm.
someone dies, and you're not going to find them here on this earth.
Hmm.
And I know
Right.
people, there's comforts that we use. He's watching over you. He's an angel. He's in a world that is so filled with pain that we all have to deal with. I never like to think of Josh as hovering over and looking down. I like to think of him as he is free of looking on the pain of this earth.
Oh, I
And
like that. Hmm.
yeah, so yeah, he died on this earth. His body died. And I love the verse in the Bible that says, "When we're absent from this earth, we are present with the Lord." And I
Yeah.
hung on to that verse like a lifeline because one of Josh's, we're obviously a family of faith and taught our kids about Jesus Christ. And, as you do with language that is appropriate for your children, I used to call Jesus, he's like your best friend. He's always there. And Josh's constant question was, if he's my best friend, then why can't we go see him? And um, and I remembered one day we were driving to town and I said, Josh, the Bible says we're gonna see him in the twinkling of an eye. And he was behind me in the rear view mirror. And all the way to town, he was blinking his eyes, open, closed, open, closed. And the week after he died, I did find out from the coroner that the accident, how he died, I needed to know because I'm a
Mhm.
curious person. And I said, if you don't tell me, I'm going to imagine. I do know that he died instantly. There was no suffering that he went through. He hit his head and severed the two vertebrae that there's
Oh,
no room for error. You're just
uh-huh.
here
Right.
one on the next. So I realized that the week before we had the conversation that said, in the twinkling of an eye, we will be standing before our best friend Jesus. And there was so much comfort in knowing that I had just told him the week before, and then the
Yeah.
event happened, and I realized, you know, that he's not
Uh-huh.
on this earth anymore. He is not lost. His body died, but his soul is looking into the face of his best friend. And
I
that
think
was
that's beautiful. Yeah. I think that's beautiful. And I
so
know Josh remains a part of your life. It's not like no one talks about him. It's not like he's not there. So, what are some of the things that your family does to include him in the things that you do?
Well, on his birthday, we actually all gather, the kids, the husbands, the dogs, everybody comes back home. And we actually have chicken fingers and fries and lots of ketchup. And even if you don't like those foods, you're eating them. We happen to have a cake and we celebrate his birthday because he was born into our family. And that is, I am a big opportunist when it comes to celebrate. If there's a reason to
Mhm.
celebrate, we're dancing.
Yes,
And
yes.
on the death day, the DOD, um, we have done all kinds of things. Some days we go for a walk. Other days we've, gone to the airport and hired another pilot to take us all on a pleasure flight. That was the most significant thing. It was really hard
Yeah.
to do, but it was something I think we all had to conquer. So we do something significant on that day because it's the day that, we said goodbye to a perfect little human being. And it cannot go past without acknowledgement.
I think
And
that's
then
beautiful. Yeah.
mhm, I
And
do
so many
always
times, yeah, go ahead.
I do realize that one of my habits is I always do a great big Facebook post. And sometimes I beat myself up for it because I'm like, oh my goodness, like who wants to read about this one more year? But I'm like, I do it anyways. And so many people are blessed by the experience. And I have had random people come out of the woodwork and share memories with me. And I can't highlight that enough that if you have a memory of someone who has died, please, please, please share it with the people who are living
Yeah,
because it's such a huge gift
yeah,
to that
it
person.
is. I mean, I
Mhm.
kind of envision it as, giving water to a dying person. I mean, you give them something that is so beautiful and so heartfelt and gives them something else to look at with joy in a
Yeah,
very tragic circumstance. So,
yeah. If your
yeah.
memories are limited.
Mhm.
And I just
Uh,
had a girl reach out to me last week that she went to high school with my daughters. And she just randomly messaged me and said, I remember Josh sitting in the bleachers when your daughters were giving a speech. And he was yelling, hey, Bassity, which is my oldest daughter's name.
uh-huh.
He
Uh-huh.
didn't care. He was there cheering her on.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, that stuck with me the whole day, and I was just so thankful. So, share your
Yes.
memories. Don't ever think a memory is going to make someone sad.
Mhm.
It's not. It's a
That's
gift.
that's so true. The memories are blessings, I think.
Yeah.
And,
Mhm.
you know, I I think you told me yesterday when we talked, you said a sentence that I wrote down and I thought it was so important. And that was grief is not qualified or quantified or comparable. Every
Mhm.
grief is its own thing. And I think that is so true and it's kind of eye-opening. So, we may all lose a parent, but when you try to tell someone else who's lost a parent, well, this is the way to do it. You can't do that. And everybody's different. Every loss is different. Every
Yeah.
loss, every death. I'm going to take loss out of my vocabulary, but
Yeah.
every death
Yeah.
is different. Even if it's the same family, every death is different.
Yeah. It's kind of like grouping people together and saying this whole group of people, they all look alike because they all have white skin or brown skin or
Mhm. Or
and they
blue
don't.
eyes. Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or a snowflake. There's not
Right.
one snowflake that you can
That's right.
duplicate. And I think
Mhm.
that's also comparable to our stories of grief. There are
Mhm.
no two stories that are the same. And I think that's why, like, when I considered writing a book and I'm like, oh, what am I going to write a book about? My story is just, you know, but no, everyone's story is significant and worthy of our ears and worthy of us listening to. Um, yeah, giving us an opportunity to tell those stories.
Yeah, and
Would
I
you
so believe I so believe, and I tell women all the time, you need to tell your story because your story is unique. And your story might reach someone that someone else's story about the same type of thing doesn't, because we all have our unique ways of sharing. And I think it is so, important to share your stories.
Yeah.
So I know
And to know
you've written a
that
children's story. Oh, go ahead.
Mhm. And to know that you can survive. And part of my tagline is that you can survive well.
I
Yes,
like that.
we all survive, but how do we survive? Are we just, my mom lost a daughter, which was my sister, and I thought grief was all hers. I thought that was hers to deal with. Um, then realizing that I needed to give myself the luxury of grieving as well. And how do we put an adjective of luxurious in front of grief? Because grief is medicine, and it's a privilege to have penicillin or cancer treatments or things that heal us. And grief is like, it's such a word that people don't want to chat about, but yet it's such a healing word. It's a healing process. It's a gift. And I think
Yes, it
grief
is.
grief is we it's a continuum that starts at the DOD and will die with us. We keep it with us. But there's some things of grief, like the isolation, the emptiness, all of the negative things, they don't have to stay. But we can enter in and revisiting memories and the good part of grief, which brings
Yes.
you to that common thing of good grief.
Yes,
How do we
yes.
get that split out? But there is
Right.
goodness in
There
grief.
is good grief. I do agree. And I think grief really tunes us into the world. It really strengthens us and it really binds us together. And
Mhm.
to ignore the grief and to not talk about it and to pretend that it isn't there denies yourself of so much growth and so much
Yep.
introspection and so much wisdom.
Mhm. Well, I have
Yeah.
this is for a whole other podcast, but I
Uh-huh.
don't believe that we all have to live with broken hearts. But I do believe that what breaks our hearts is when we don't deal with stuff. Then we
I
become
so agree.
broken.
Yes,
Mhm.
I can so
That's
relate to
another
that.
that's a whole
Yes.
other podcast.
Well, we might have to schedule that one. Yeah, I know, when my daughter died, no one knew how to deal with it, least of all me, and members of my family decided the best way to deal with it is to just never talk about it. She was just here briefly, we would all forget and move on. And not talking about it was way more damaging than the grief itself. So, I think it's important that you bring it out into the open and
Yeah.
and make it be a part of your life. And it's not a
Yeah.
thing to shy away from, and it's not a thing to be embarrassed about, and it's not a thing to try to keep from everyone. It's a part of your life, and it's a
Well,
part of
we're
what made you
afraid.
who you are. Mhm.
Yeah. We're afraid to be sad, but yet we're
Yes, we
not
are.
afraid to be happy.
Mhm.
But on the same line of from happiness to sadness, it is the same line. And we can only be as happy as we are sad.
Yes,
So
I agree.
I want to deeply feel both, but it's scary to
It is
deeply
scary.
feel sad and
Mhm.
to pay attention to it.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
also opens the door for really big happiness,
Mhm.
which,
That's
you
so
know,
true.
you can't
And
have the other.
another thing you said yesterday, or maybe I said it, I don't remember, but I wrote it down. I thought it was beautiful. Who made the rule that grief is one emotion we have to get over?
Yeah.
You can't get over it. So don't even think you can and don't even try. Just embrace it and let it be part of who you are. I think
Absolutely.
I think the dark parts of our lives and the wounds of our lives give us so much more opportunity for growth and wisdom and love and compassion. And honestly, they're not negative things in our life. It's just part of our life, and they're powerful parts of our life.
They are. Yeah, you
Yeah.
said that really well. You should write that down.
I should. But I'm talking and if I write it, I mess up. So
Yeah,
but
yeah. No,
I know
that's excellent.
you've written a children's story and now you're working on a memoir. Would you like to give us an update on those two projects? Give us the
Yes,
titles and
yeah, the children's story is done. I'm waiting for an illustrator. That's my search right now. I would really like one of my daughters to illustrate it because they're all very creative. And it is the story of a rock named Peter who starts on the top of a mountain with just a beautiful view. And he gets dislodged by a mountain climber and ends up rolling around in the ocean. And I talk about his story, his journey of being angry at the polishing, but then he's found and treasured. Um, and so it's a story that's personal to me. You know, and my story that I'm writing, my memoir, it kind of supports that whole thing that from the age of 6, I really was dislodged from a very loving home. And here I am, in my almost 60s. And I am, I'm thankful for the polishing and I'm thankful for the education that I've had outside of a classroom. And I guess I like to call it God's classroom,
yes.
where he's been patient with me. He's taught me things. He's loved me, but he's also allowed me to go through some really crappy stuff where at points in my life, I'm like, God, how can you love me? Like, you don't love me. If you really loved me, you would not let this happen. But as I look back and think, without those things, like you just said a few minutes ago, we would not be, we would not have the depth of humanness that we have. We wouldn't be able to pave the way for others, show empathy, have compassion. I can't be compassionate in a circumstance that I can't really identify with.
Right.
So that's what the memoir is about. It's also just a really crazy, interesting story of
Yes.
things you can't make up.
Those
So, and
are the
because
best
I
kinds of stories.
yeah, because I love to write and it fulfills a creative side, um, I'm going for it.
I think that's beautiful. And I know that your words are going to reach people who really need to hear them and help them get through something they're going through. So I think that's beautiful. So, how can people reach out to you?
Well, I am in the process of dividing my website into wendyelle.com,
And that's
Wendy.
ELLE. Yeah.
Yeah. And that will highlight the writing side of what I'm doing. And then WLS Design will highlight my day job. So I'm in the process of breaking those two apart um, and just working towards, and it's Instagram. I love Instagram um,
Yes.
because Instagram, it does, and Facebook, they do share the good parts of life. We don't so often highlight, the hard things, but in the messaging is where the hard things are shared
That's
in the
true.
private
That is so
messaging.
true.
Um,
Mhm.
so I have 40 or 50 people that I engage with who, have built relationships with where they've been willing to reach out and ask the hard questions when I do a post about death or, uh, so I love that. I love the
That
community.
is
They,
beautiful. Mhm.
yeah, it's not confined by a room or a town or you know, the world is
Yeah.
actually pretty small.
That is pretty small. It is pretty small. And we'll have links to your sites in the show notes as well. So what's
Alrighty.
one question you wish I'd asked?
Oh, I forgot
That
about
I
that one.
That's
Oh,
okay if there's nothing, but is there just something else you'd like to share with us that we haven't talked about?
wow. Um, I think you will understand this maybe deeper than a whole lot of people because of the pod group that we share in and how we met. Is never assume that the person that you see in daily contact, in weekly contact, the person that you work with, never assume that you really know their backstory. Um, and that allows, when you never assume, it always leaves the door open for complete kindness.
Ah, I like that. Mhm.
Yeah, because as I write my story and share it with the group of authors that are kind of encouraging me, pushing me along, there are things that we all assume about each other. And then when you really find out the story or the truth, you do open the door for compassion and kindness that maybe what
Yes.
you see outside, there's a whole lot more going on the inside.
Yes,
And I
I think
as
that is so true. Mhm.
as humans, we need to make room for that. And that is a non-judgmental space. And I think right now we're a world that hashtags kindness, but yet we're all on the streets honking at each other.
Yes, yes, I agree. Everybody's
Yeah.
just seems to be at the boiling over point all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think
yeah.
coming out of the pandemic, when we're recalibrating,
Mhm.
when when we're trying to figure out what the next steps are, it's just, yeah, give people space, give them room. And I think the most important thing for me growing up in a Mennonite home where I was surrounded by loving people, but also the message is, there's a pretty heavy foot of judgment in that, in any faith, and realizing that judgment, it's not our job. Don't do
That's
it.
true. That's so true.
Yeah.
And don't
And
make
as you
assumptions. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you say, like, we're not our worst mistake. I love that
Mhm.
tag now. I kind
Mhm.
of like I'm feeding that in as I'm writing
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because some of the things that I'm gonna share in my story are pretty significantly horrible. And I need to give my space to forgive myself, to not judge, and to forgive others. And to leave the offenses, if somebody didn't say the right thing to you after your mom died, cover it with grace and kindness
Yes.
and
Yes. It's not worth being mad about something. That takes a lot of energy, and you can use that energy to do something beneficial in the world. So, yeah, it just isn't worth it at all. Well, thanks so much, Wendy. I've loved having you on. I knew we would have a really deep conversation. And I think that some of the things that we've discussed really will help people in their daily life when they encounter someone who experiences a death in their family or a death in their
yeah,
community. So thank you so
I hope
much
so.
for being on. Yeah,
Thank
I loved
you.
it.
Thanks for the great conversation. And
You're
as always,
welcome.
in huge admiration of you, I'm following your footsteps.
Thanks, Wendy. We'll be back in a moment.
Okay, love you, Toby.
Love you too. Remember, none of us is our worst mistake. We all have so much more to offer the world, and those so called mistakes are blessed opportunities to learn and grow. Next week, we'll continue to bring you inspiring stories by people who've identified a need for change and are working to make a difference in the world. Subscribe to our Patreon channel, Fierce Conversations, for special access and behind the scenes info. Go to patreon.com/fierce conversations or click on the link in the show notes. 10% of the Patreon proceeds are dedicated to providing workbooks to women in prison. The show notes also provide a link to purchase my book, Living with Conviction, and a link to get more information about Wendy and her work. In my memoir, Living with Conviction, I recount a conversation I had in prison where my friend Lisa told me. In here, we can talk about all the hard things. In fact, I think we must. And so we shall. This is Fierce Conversations with Toby. Until the next time.